Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to take something that might seem incredibly dense, over 70 years of constitutional history, and totally transform it into a structured, easy-to-follow study guide. We are taking the massive living rulebook that governs over 1 billion people, the Constitution of India, and breaking down exactly how, and more importantly why, it has evolved since 1950.
Right off the bat, let's look at this massive number, 106. That is the total number of times the Constitution of India has been amended as of September 2023. Just think about that for a second. It completely proves this isn't some static piece of history locked behind a glass case somewhere. It's a truly living document that adapts, shifts, and transforms right alongside the nation it governs.
So to make sense of all this without getting overwhelmed, we've structured our explainer into 5 key areas. We're going to cover 1. The Amendment Rulebook, 2. Land reforms versus rights, 3. The mini-constitution and restoration, 4. Governance, voting, and territories, and finally, 5. Education and social justice. Let's get right into it. Starting with Section 1, the Amendment Rulebook, how the Constitution is actually changed. Okay, so under Article 368, Parliament basically has 3 different pathways to alter the text. Think of them like 3 levels of difficulty. First, basic administrative stuff, like creating new states or adjusting salaries. Just needs a simple majority vote. Easy enough, right? Second, if you want to alter major structural elements, including fundamental rights, you need a special 2/3 majority. And the third, the hardest level, if you're trying to shift the federal structure, meaning the actual balance of power between the central government and the states, you need that special majority plus the consent of at least half of the state legislatures. Moving to Section 2, Land Reforms versus Rights, the early constitutional tug-of-war. Almost immediately after the Constitution was written, a massive clash erupted. On one side, the government desperately wanted to enact sweeping agricultural land reforms to redistribute wealth. On the other side, individual citizens had a fundamental right to property. Parliament kept trying to take land from wealthy landlords, and the courts kept blocking them. So what was the fix? The First Amendment in 1951 created the Ninth Schedule. Think of this as a constitutional vault, a protective shield to keep the courts out of land reform completely. They doubled down on this with the Fourth Amendment in 1955, making property compensation beyond court scrutiny. And by 1964, the 17th Amendment threw 44 more acts straight into that protective Ninth Schedule vault. But you know the Supreme Court wasn't just going to sit back, right? They pushed back hard. In the incredibly famous 1967 Goloknath case, the court basically drew a line in the sand. They ruled that Parliament simply could not touch a citizen's fundamental rights, period. Even if the government's goal was some noble state policy, those core rights were completely untouchable. Well, Parliament retaliated swiftly in 1971. With the 24th Amendment, they firmly asserted they had the absolute power to amend literally any part of the Constitution, including those fundamental rights. And they actually forced the president to sign off on these changes. At the exact same time, the 25th Amendment further weakened the right to private property. It set a new rule. If the government passed a law to achieve a directive principle, specifically guidelines like 39B and C about equalizing wealth, it absolutely couldn't be challenged in court just because it violated an individual's fundamental rights. All right, Section 3, the mini-constitution and restoration, the emergency era changes. That immense power struggle set the stage for the totally turbulent 1970s. The 38th Amendment made declarations of emergency non-judiciable, meaning courts were completely stripped of their power to even question them. Then the 40th Amendment secured borders with maritime limits and stuffed dozens more laws into that Ninth Schedule. Then boom, the 42nd Amendment in 1976. This thing was so massive, it's literally called the mini-constitution. It centralized power, severely curtailed judicial review, and added words like socialist and secular to the preamble, plus fundamental duties for citizens. But the pendulum always swings back. Following the emergency, the 44th Amendment in 1978 was all about restoration. It brought back the court's powers, added strict safeguards against future emergencies, and, crucially, it finally deleted the right to property from the fundamental rights list altogether. Which brings us to Section 4, Governance, Voting, and Territories, the administrative evolution. Let's step away from the big ideological battles for a minute and track how the physical map evolved. It's fascinating. The Seventh Amendment back in 1956 was a massive reorganization, drawing linguistic lines to structure India into 14 states and 6 union territories. Then, as the nation grew, the 14th incorporated Puducherry, the 35th brought Sikkim into the fold.
By 1991, the 69th Amendment created the National Capital Territory of Delhi. We also see specific regional targeting, like the 98th Amendment giving special provisions for the Hyderabad-Karnataka region. And quite recently, the 100th Amendment in 2015 literally secured the borders by swapping small pockets of land with Bangladesh.
We also have to look at the operational rules of politics, because they changed drastically too. The 11th changed how the vice president is elected. The 52nd introduced the absolute game changer, the anti-defection law, basically trying to stop politicians from endlessly party hopping after getting elected. The 91st tightened God even further, capping the number of ministers at 15% of the lower house so you don't get these massive, bloated cabinets. The 97th elevated cooperative societies by giving them constitutional status. And we can't forget the 99th, which attempted to create a National Judicial Appointments Commission to change how judges are picked, though the Supreme Court actually struck that down to protect their own independence. Now, here is a number that directly affects almost everyone watching. If you have ever wondered why you get to cast your vote at 18 instead of 21, well, you can thank the 61st Amendment, which officially lowered the voting age back in 1989. Moving right into the 1990s, we see a massive, massive push for grassroots democracy. In 1992, the Constitution underwent this brilliant twin transformation. The 73rd Amendment granted formal constitutional status to Panchayati Raj institutions, meaning local village councils were officially protected. And simultaneously, the 74th Amendment did the exact same thing for urban local bodies or city municipalities. It was a huge moment where power was finally decentralized directly down into the hands of local citizens.
To wrap up the governance side, there were a few key administrative and financial modernizations. The 80th insured states got a guaranteed 29% of central taxes. The 84th and 87th Amendments froze the number of parliamentary seats until 2026. Why? So that states that successfully lowered their population growth wouldn't be punished by losing their political representation. Pretty clever, actually. The 92nd brought the total number of officially recognized languages to 22. And of course, the 101st Amendment in 2016 completely restructured indirect taxes by paving the way for the GST.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, Education and Social Justice, Expanding Rights and Representation. A genuinely massive milestone for the nation happened in 2002. The 86th Amendment officially made elementary education a fundamental right. It explicitly forced the state to guarantee free and compulsory education for every single child between the ages of 6 and 14. Now, looking closely at representation, things get very specific. The 77th Amendment protected affirmative action by ensuring scheduled castes and scheduled tribes had reservations not just when they were hired, but in job promotions as well. Also, Parliament has to periodically renew political representation. So the 79th extended reserved parliamentary seats to 2010, and then recently the 104th Amendment extended those scheduled caste and scheduled tribe reserve seats all the way to 2030. Though interestingly, that same amendment actually ended the decades-old practice of nominating members of the Anglo-Indian community to Parliament. You'll also notice Parliament periodically tweaks the rules to clarify rights and policies. The 16th Amendment added the sovereignty and integrity of India as a totally valid reason to restrict free speech. The 78th threw 27 more land acts into our old friend, the protective Ninth Schedule. The 81st is super interesting. It lets states carry forward unfilled minority job quotas, backlog vacancies, to the next year without being blocked by an older rule that capped total reservations at 50%. And the 82nd allowed lowering qualifying exam marks for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe promotions. And here is the modern landscape of social justice. The 89th split the oversight commissions for scheduled castes and tribes into two totally separate bodies. The 93rd cleared the path for a 27% quota for other backward classes in higher education. The 102nd gave the National Commission for Backward Classes formal constitutional status. Then came a major shift in 2019. The 103rd Amendment allowed up to 10% reservation based specifically on income, known as economically weaker sections. Finally, the 105th explicitly restored the power of individual states to maintain their own lists of backward classes. Which brings us to the very latest edition, the 106th Amendment in 2023. This was historic. It reserves 33%, a full one-third, of the total seats in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies for women for a period of 15 years. So having tracked this absolutely incredible journey, from those very early intense battles over land reform, to completely reshaping the national map, to refining the core rules of politics, and expanding modern rights, we're left with one really provocative thought. With 106 structural changes since 1950, is a constitution ever truly finished? Or is it simply a framework destined to be constantly rewritten and reimagined by every single new generation? Thank you so much for watching this explainer.